So just for those of you who just joined us, I'll give everyone 1 more minute to come in and then we'll make a start on the webinar. Okay, well, it's officially 2 minutes past 1, so we'll make a start. Welcome to this Action Indonesia Global Species Management Plan webinar. It's great to see you here today. I'm going to give you a bit of an intro and introduce our panelists, and then I will give you a bit of housekeeping as well before we start. But before that, if you don't know who I am, I'm Julia Migné, and I'm the Director of Conservation Optimism. If you've never heard of us, we're an organization that aims to empower everyone to act for nature. And we do that by shifting the narrative away from the doom and gloom and highlighting stories of conservation success and learning from failure as well. So you can find out more about us at conservationoptimism.org. We have a podcast series, we've got a film festival, but today is not about conservation optimism. So I'm really excited to be here for this specific webinar. And so just so you know what the format is going to be like for the upcoming hour, I will be asking our speakers questions, and then at the end, there'll be a Q&A with you, the audience, so you'll get a chance to ask your questions too. So feel free to put your questions in the chat at any moment during the webinar, and then we will be picking them at the end, and the panelists will be able to answer them. And so in terms of housekeeping as well, so this webinar will be delivered in English, but it will be recorded, and so it will be available to view with Indonesia Bahasa subtitles afterwards. But while this is happening in English, if you speak Indonesia Bahasa as well, feel free to put your questions in Indonesia Bahasa if you want in the chat, because we do have translators with us today. So, so you can choose whichever language works best for you. So as I said, we're recording, and so I will also ask everyone to make sure that you're on mute, just so that we don't have any like background sounds when our panelists are answering the questions. And this webinar will take approximately an hour. And we're super excited today because we are joined by a representative of the Action Indonesia Global Species Management Plans, also known as the GSMPs, for Banteng, Babirusa, and Anoa. And so today what we're going to do is we are going to focus on the work of the Education Working Group from the Action Indonesia GSMPs. So we have a very international team with us today, which is very exciting, and they will be sharing their education expertise and how that contributes towards the one plan approach conservation efforts for the amazing species I just mentioned before. And excitingly, today marks the 1-month countdown to the 4th International Action in Indonesia Celebration Day. Of course, you'll hear all about it during the webinar. And we are joined by educators from international zoos as well, who are going to share with us the work they've been doing with their different zoos to raise awareness about all the wonderful species that the groups work on. So just to give a bit of an intro, I'll introduce each of the panelists, and they'll give a little wave so that you know who they are. So starting with Dr. James Burton. James is the chair of the IUCN SSC Asian Wild Cattle Specialist Group and also the strategic coordinator of the GSMP for Banteng, Babirusa, and Anoa. Then we have Dr. Ligaya Tumelaka, if you want to give us a wave as well, head of the Education and Training Division at PKBSI, which is the Indonesian Association of Zoos, Sumatran Tiger GSMP co-convener of the Husbandry Working Group and also of the Education Working Group. So many hats today. Then we have Charlotte Smith, who is the Director of Conservation, Education and Engagement at Chester Zoo and also the co-convener of the Education Working Group. Then we have Yuliati Nomaya, also known as Maya. So Maya, if you want to give us a wave as well so people see you. Zoo educator at Ragunan Zoo in Java, Indonesia. And then we have also Julia Klomb, graphics and exhibitory manager at Zoo Miami in the US. And last but not least, we have Holly Cushion, who is a zoo ranger at Chester Zoo. So this is our wonderful panel. Very excited to be able to chat with all of you today. Before we start, I believe we might have a poll in Zoom where you can tell us where you're joining us from. If the poll is not there for whatever reason, oh, it's there, it's appeared. So you can tell us where you're joining us from today. I'll just answer myself before continuing. So yeah, we'll get an idea of where you're joining us from. But as well, if you want to, introduce yourself and tell us where you work as well in the chat, feel free to do that. It's always nice to know where people are coming from and what they do. But now is the time to start officially with the webinar. So I will come first to you, James. So as I just mentioned before, you're the chair of the IUCN SSC Asian Wild Cattle Specialist Group and the convener of the GSMP. First, I would like to ask you, could you explain to us what a global species management plan is for people who may not know? And can you tell us a bit more about the approach taken in this conservation plan?
Sure, great. Well, it's nice to see so many people joining the webinar. So the Action Indonesia program, which is set up as the 3 global species management plans for Anoa, Banteng, and Babirusa, is a very collaborative and partnership approach. And it was set up around these species because they are all endangered as defined by IUCN. So there is a really urgent need for conservation action to save these species. The goal of the Action Indonesia partnership is to achieve backup populations in zoos around the world in case of the need for reintroduction to the wild in future, and also to work with partners and support in situ conservation efforts, both in monitoring these species in the wild and also their protection. And so what we've done is working with WASA, the World Association for Zoos and Aquaria, is to develop using their framework, which allows for zoos from different regions across the world to work together. We've used this framework and built links and partnerships and friendships with lots of zoos and other organizations in Europe, in North America, and most importantly, of course, in Indonesia as well. And what that's allowed us to do is to bring together technical expertise for both in situ and also for ex situ skills that we need, and also the resources to allow us to achieve our goal of secure populations both in the wild and in zoos. And so we've set up thematic working groups, and we're obviously going to be hearing more about the education working group today that can carry out the work of the GSMP, so population management, protection in the wild, animal welfare and husbandry. And so far, we've really made some pretty big achievements over the past 6 years since we started out. What we've been able to do, working really closely with our Indonesian colleagues in many Indonesian zoos and from PKBSI, the Indonesian Zoo Association, is to run 2 cycles of breeding and transfer recommendations across more than 10 of those Indonesian zoos. And that's resulted in, I think, more than 33 births from across these species. So that's a really big achievement because previously there wasn't a collaborative cooperative breeding approach that was carried out across Indonesian zoos. So that's a huge success for Indonesian zoos and for this program. And we've done a lot of webinars and training events over the past few years as well. What I'm really excited about is we really need to raise the awareness of these species to get a higher profile, raise interest, raise support, and just get people talking about the great conservation stories that are coming from this, and also the needs that we have to carry on protecting and conserving these species. So working groups activities, and we're going to hear more about the work across the 3 regions and their work in raising awareness on Anoa, Babirusa and Banteng.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I think what you've just mentioned, is like we've got a theme of collaboration here, which is really exciting. So it's great to see so many people from many different countries working together. And also, I guess the call to action for anyone watching, if we each tell our friends and family about these wonderful species, we can all spread the word as well. So we will now move to Charlotte and Ligaya. So as I mentioned before, you're both co-conveners of the Education Working Group. And I will start with you, Charlotte, who, just as a reminder, works at Chester Zoo. If you could tell us what you've been working on the past few years, so that people get a better idea of what's been happening.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Education Working Group formed in about 2018, although there was education work within the GSMP before that. Really, I think, as a recognition that the challenges species face are often down to people. So having a real focus on people as part of that one plan approach and using education and bringing educators together internationally from the territories that we work in would really support the work of the GSMP and that goal of having sustainable populations long term. So we have expertise from across the US, Indonesia and Europe as part of our group, and meet regularly to develop the education program. But as I say, we are quite young as a group working together, so we've got lots more plans for the future as well. But so far, we really wanted to tackle that issue that Anoa, Banteng and Babirusa are amazing, unique species, and as James said, endangered, but they're not big cats or great apes. They're not the big superstars of conservation. They don't always get that kind of loving appreciation that many of these other species get, where you might automatically think of them as being of conservation concern. Cattle and pigs are quite ever present in our lives. We don't always necessarily realise that that we should be concerned about them in just the same way as those possibly more exciting species. Although I know there's lots of people on this call who would argue that Babirusa, Banteng and Anoa are really, really exciting species. And that's really what we started to want to do, was to help people see that they are really exciting. They do really, really need people's support. They need conservation efforts. So one of the first things we did was set up Action Indonesia Day and hosted the first day in August 2019. This year's event, which we'll probably keep trying to plug, is the 14th of August. And really the idea of the day was to shine a light on the species, why they're so special, why they need conservation help, some of the threats they face due to habitat loss and illegal hunting, and really why we should all care. And so we launched that in 2019, and it's evolved since. Obviously, I think most people are aware 2020 and 2021 were difficult years for hosting events, particularly in person. So a lot of our campaign efforts moved online, and many of the organisations, we've had about 60 organisations around the world participating, moved online, did Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives, lots of activity on social media to really try and get that message out there. We're hoping this year we'll see an evolution again as we move back to having both face-to-face events and taking what we've learned about virtual engagement forward. So that's one of the sort of key things that we started with, and I'll let others add a few more as we go on. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you very much. Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting time for event and outreach in the past few years. We've all had to adapt quite quickly. So I'm going to go now to Ligaya. So just as a reminder, you're working at PKBSI, which is the Indonesian Associations of Zoos. And you're also the co-convener of the Education Working Group. So how have you involved other educators in this work? And can you tell us a bit more about, how you prepare them to be part of this campaign?
Okay, thank you, Julia. Hi, everybody. Glad to be at this workshop. Well, actually, what I have been doing now for this program, so since 2018, actually, I got an opportunity to improve my knowledge about how to work with the education in the zoo with Charlotte and colleague in Chester Zoo. And then I went with Maya that time. So I learned a lot about new stuff for educating. So those knowledge that I bring to Indonesia, and I start to also help my colleague in Indonesia, to know about those knowledge. Actually, we need to use it for do all the campaign about this beautiful tree species that been talking a lot. Yeah, I mean, Indonesia has a lot of different species, but for us, sometimes if they are in front of our eyes, maybe it's a little bit difficult to think like, well, we need, important to think about them. But with this program, actually, it's helped us also to prioritize which species that we need to work with. So because of that, I've been helping also, not helping, actually managing how to give all the training program for, like James said, that technical knowledge for all those three species. So we also can start doing campaign for this three beautiful species or our Indonesian species. So people will know better about them, and I'll just use the word from Chester to act for them, actually. So that's what I've been doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, and you're raising a really interesting point about the perception, and like when you see species from your own countries, how sometimes you don't realize that, you have no idea. Like I remember when I moved from France to the UK, for me, red squirrels were really common, and then in the UK, they're really rare, and I just had no idea. So perception is interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess now we're going to move on to having case studies from regional zoos. So we'll have a few different speakers to tell us a bit more about what they've been doing in their own zoos. So to start with, and also about how they've been engaging with like visitors and working with other zoos. So to start with, Julia, so just as a reminder, you're from Zoo Miami. Do you want to tell us a bit more about the way you've been involved in Action Indonesia Day from the very first year, and what did you do? What are the highlights from your experience working on that?
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a little bit. I have some pictures to share about what Zoo Miami has been part of as part of the Action Indonesia GSMP. First, I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. My name is Julia Clem, the Graphics and Exhibits Manager at Zoo Miami in the United States. Like Julia said, we've been part of the GSMP probably since 2016, 2017 on the animal husbandry side. And then I joined the education working group in early 2019, so just before the first Action Indonesia Day. Together as an education working group, we identified the need for global awareness for all three of the species. And we plan to launch the awareness day, but then also a website and some other ways to really gain global awareness, and not just within zoos, but outside of zoos as well. So Zoo Miami took on the role of creating the website. So in 2019, we launched the Action Indonesia website, and it's actionindonesiagsmp.org. It has information about all three of the different species. There's news, there's a countdown to Action Indonesia Day, and we use this website a lot to raise awareness for the programs. It includes downloadable resources that are free to everyone, so anyone can just go onto the website, download everything from fact sheets, activities, zookeeper talks, printable signage. It's also in English as well as in Indonesian Bahasa. We also started the Action Indonesia social media pages in 2019. So Zoo Miami runs both of the Facebook and Instagram, as well as the website for Action Indonesia. That also, again, launched in 2019. We try to keep it as updated as possible. We share a lot of posts from other zoos that post things about Babirusa, Banteng, and Anoa, and then we use this as an advertising campaign for Action Indonesia Day as well. We do a lot of Facebook Lives and Instagram Lives on Action Indonesia Day from all over the world, and try to get zoos from across the globe involved in our social media campaigns. So for Zoo Miami in 2019 was our first ever Action Indonesia Day. We did a huge in-park event. We had 4 Action Indonesia's tables set up. We actually have all 3 of the Action Indonesia species, as well as Sumatran tiger and Lagai is the co-convener of Sumatran Tiger, so we included that in our Action Indonesia event. So we had tables, we had activities, we had biofacts, we had a whole bunch of things set up on that day. And so guests could actually take a personality test that matched them with one of the 4 animals. And then they used that as a scavenger hunt to go to all 4 of the tables and get little stickers like this one. Oh, of course, it's not going to show. We had stickers for all of the animals that they could get to complete their scavenger hunt. We had zookeeper talks and behind the scenes tours, and our keepers really loved this event. They were able to take people back to actually meet some of our amazing Action Indonesia species. Like at the time we had Watson, our Babirusa, who's now at Zoo Tampa. And at the end of the scavenger hunt, one lucky family was able to meet our Sumatran tigers, and that was kind of our big finale. We did Facebook and Instagram lives on the Action Indonesia accounts, highlighting zookeepers and the work that they do for all of the Action Indonesia species. And we had posts from around the world in both English and in Indonesia for that day. So these are some of the pictures of what Zoo Miami did. We had activities at each one of the tables. We also created interpretive signage that went up that year in 2019 and remains up in the park to highlight the Action Indonesia GSMP. And we do like small things around this throughout the year now at, this one is at Banteng, and hopefully we'll get some up at Anoa and Babirusa also. In 2020, COVID obviously took the world by storm and we closed for about 6 months, but that didn't mean that we stopped Action Indonesia Day, but we went totally virtual. We hosted keeper talks and animal facts from around the world. And Indonesia blew us out of the park in 2020. The amount of participation and visits that we got on social media from Indonesia was absolutely amazing. Like we were so happy to see the amount of participation that increased from 2019 to 2020 in C2, which was really cool to see. For 2021, we were still kind of like semi-pandemic. So we did some enrichment events in park. Each year we do an enrichment for each one of the 4 species, or three to 4 species. And we do extra keeper talks and stuff, but mostly we remained online for the 2021 Action Indonesia Day. So we posted a lot from the Zoo Miami account as well as from the Action Indonesia accounts. And we did some in-park promotions, but for the most part, we stayed online for 2021. This year, we plan to again have tables at all 4 of the species. We have our amazing CTS, our conservation teen scientists, or teams that will be researching all about all 4 of the species and be out there with biofacts for each one of the species there. We'll have games and activities, learning programming at each one of the tables. We'll have extra zookeeper talks for each one of the species, live Facebook and Instagram talks from our zookeepers. And then we'll also be sharing a lot of virtual resources that we have on the Action Indonesia website. And so that is what Zoo Miami has done for the GSMP in the past couple of years.
Amazing. Well, you've clearly been busy. It looks incredible. And I mean, I love a scavenger hunt. So, you know, I'm getting FOMO just looking at all the photos. Hopefully you'll have a great time this year as well. I will now move on to Maya. So Maya, you work with Ragunan Zoo in Java, Indonesia. Could you tell us how you have been involved with Action Indonesia Day?
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm Yuliati Nurmaya, working as zoo educator at Ragunan Zoo from Jakarta, Indonesia. Our zoo, I involved in several GSMP education working group activities, such as capacity building and training for Indonesian zoo educators, and deliver updates on GSMP education activities. And our zoo holds all 4 GSMP species, so it's important for us to share the awareness and inspire people to protect and conserve the species. Maybe Charlie can share my PowerPoint, my slide. Okay, thank you. Next. Yes, that I involved several GSMP education working group activities such as capacity building and training for Indonesian zoo educators and deliver updates on GSMP education activities. And then next, I made and installed a GSMP animal conservation interpretation board in front of the Anoa, Banteng, Babirusa, and Sumatran tiger enclosure, which was downloaded from GSMP Action Indonesia website. Thank you, Charlie and Julia, to make this interpretation board, and I can download from the GSMP website. And I also take part in the celebration of Action Indonesia Day every year, starting from 2019. Next slide, maybe. The program took from the form of seminar, keeper talks, and games. That's the games, the coloring mask, and that is followed by 150 participants. And in 2020, during the pandemic, the Action Indonesia Day event was held online in form of an Instagram Live, introducing Anoa, Babirusa, Banteng, and GSMP programs to the public. Next, Charlie. That's 2020. And in 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Action Indonesian Day activities was held online through a webinar attended by more than 100 students from Jakarta, Indonesia. And in this year, because Jakarta, the number of COVID is still high, then maybe in the Action Indonesian Day in this year will be held online in form of a webinar and inviting more students through DKI Jakarta. And we will collaboration with DKI Jakarta province government and target 500 participants, I hope, can join in Action Indonesian Day in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. And it's I think it's something that we've heard from various people now that in a way is like, even though things had to go virtual due to the pandemic, I think it's amazing to see how the audiences really grew with these virtual events, and how, you know, people who may not have been able to access the in-person side of things were able to access the virtual events and could hear more about these amazing species. So that's really exciting. I will now move on to, so we've done, obviously we've been in North America, we've now moved to Asia, and so now we are going to Europe. So Holly, could you tell us how you've been celebrating with Chester Zoo and how you've been involved with Action Indonesia Day?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Holly. I'm one of the zoo rangers at Chester Zoo. So just to give you a bit of background, the Zoo Ranger team were responsible for delivering all of the public engagement activities within the zoo, and we have supported Action Indonesia Day every year. So I've got a few photos of what we've been delivering in previous years out in the zoo. This photo here is one of the additional talks that we've put on to focus on Babirusa, Banteng and Anoa, and also Sumatran tigers as well. So if possible during these times, we'll work with keepers to be able to arrange things like feeds at the same time as the talk to increase animal visibility, but we don't usually advertise feeds at Chester Zoo, so it kind of makes it a bit more special and allows people to be able to see those animals a little bit more. And if the keepers have time as well, they do tend to stay behind and do a question and answer session at the end as well. They do seem to like that, and that seems to be very, very popular with visitors as well. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we also can make use of other engagement activities during the zoo. This picture here is of one of the touch table sessions. You can see there that we've got loads of different items, including skulls. These seem to really help pull visitors in. They always want to know what the skulls are. And it can highlight kind of these really, really unique features that obviously the Banteng, Babirusa and Anoa have. So it makes it really special, and we do have lots of craft activities available. Here you can see just on the tray on the right hand side we've got these masks, which is a nice little craft for people of all ages to do. It also allows kind of highlighting the zoo to other visitors as they wear these masks around the zoo. People wonder where they've got them from and things like that, which is really kind of nice touch. Next slide, please. So in more recent years, we've introduced kind of games and activities to what we've been doing. So we found that games are a really good way to include children and families as well, and allow participants to take an active role in their learning. It seems to kind of really have a really good impact. So this image here is of a deforestation board game that we've got, where there's kind of action cards. And you have to respond to those by putting different animals in different areas and things like that. And all of these games are available on the Action Indonesia website as well for people to download completely for free. So they are fantastic. So as well as delivering our in-zooing program, we've also been involved alongside other zoos to develop the resources for Action Indonesia Day, which includes lots of talk scripts, craft activities, games, the interpretational signage as well. And like I say, these are available for everybody to access. And they do include those animal masks, which people do seem to love as well, and that board game. So this year, we plan to repeat all of those successful activities that we've had, especially with talks and keeper feeds as well. We're going to get those touch tables up and running again, because just like everyone else, you know, COVID kind of changed things a lot for us last year. So getting those touch tables out again will be a brilliant way to engage people in these species. And in addition, this year, we're also going to be working with an external storyteller who's going to be delivering pop-up stories around the zoo, one of which does actually feature a Babirusa, which is really exciting. So that'll be really good as well. So that's what Chester have been doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Holly. And I mean, who doesn't love an animal mask? I think another thread that we've seen through all the speakers today as well is just like this amazing creativity in the way that you've been running activities. And so it's great to see like all the different outreach that's happened. So thank you so much to all the panelists. We've had lots of interesting things being discussed already, but now is the exciting time for you, the audience. Is the time where you can actually ask your questions. So I can't see any in the chat currently, but if you have any questions, I think you can either put them in the chat, or you can probably raise your hand if you want to like ask your question directly as well, and then we can have you unmute. So I'll just give everyone like maybe 30 seconds if there are any burning questions. Otherwise, I will kickstart with a question. So let me just give everyone a bit of time. I can't see any raised hand, but let me check the participant list. Okay, I might just kickstart the questions and then people can put theirs in the chat. So I think as we've mentioned before, a lot of the things that everyone were doing due to the pandemic, it had to be moved to the virtual world quite quickly. And that's something that a lot of you have mentioned. Are there any kind of like key learnings, if there's people in the audience who would like to do, you know, virtual events? What are the things that you found worked really well? What are the things that you thought were difficult, and like things that you may have tried and have failed? Any kind of key learnings that you can share with the audience? It's not addressed to anyone specifically, so anyone who feels like starting can start.
As I could start by making a comment on that. I think one of the advantages, particularly for us with this being a global campaign, is that actually being online really gives you that sense of global audience. And it was actually interesting for us as a group thinking just about some of the basics of timings. So we had different people posting things across quite a long period of time, because actually the 14th of August spreads over several time zones. So making sure that we've got posts happening at times that are relevant for different parts of our audience, because we really are reaching audiences around the globe and in different territories. It's a feature of our meetings when we try and find times to be together as well. But really important when you're thinking about a global campaign to think about the timing. And although people can come back to things, when you're doing a live, there is something special about watching something whilst the keeper is with the animal and while the person is speaking, and being able to ask live questions of them. So I think that's one of our learnings, thinking about live audiences, but I think it was a real benefit for us to be able to engage a global audience, particularly when we're doing something like a global species management plan that is very much about us all pulling together across the globe to save species.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ooh, I'm losing my voice. Yeah, it's interesting when you have a global audience, isn't it? There's lots of things to like consider, but the virtual world makes it more accessible. So yeah, did anyone want to add anything? Because otherwise we've got 2 questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to add anything to this question, you can go ahead. I'm having a look at everyone, seeing if, okay. I think we can probably move on to the questions in the chat then. So Holly Bright is saying that it's a very interesting program, and they're asking, as they started in 2018, how long did this take to start running? So what was kind of like the prep work before it officially became, you know, a group, I guess?
I suppose I can answer that as well. Although we started as an education working group in 2018, the GSMP had been running for a number of years before, so it wasn't a completely cold start, and some members of the education working group had been involved before that, so we did have a little bit longer. Although I think with Action Indonesia Day, it didn't take that long. It was certainly when Julia joined and we really got going with developing the website and the resources and creating that mass, but it did take time to get the initial set of animations and to create the resources that people could then go on and use that would make it easier for zoos to participate, particularly if they didn't already have talks written or signage for these species that was particularly extensive, or content about what GSMP is. But going back to sort of the points we made at the beginning, these aren't necessarily the species that zoos have put a lot of effort into doing education programs around. So we felt it was really important to have resources for them to make that easier if it wasn't something they had time to do. And it went alongside some work that had begun a little bit earlier around training programs, which Ligaya and her team were very involved in. So creating training programs that we had the resources, but we could then also run training to show people how to use them if it wasn't something they were familiar with. So that process probably did take the year leading up to the first Action Indonesia Day, particularly with the time to get all of the website content ready as well.
I can see that Julia, you're unmuted. So yeah, if you want to like take the question as well.
We saw actually a lot of, I think we were surprised at the amount of participation that we had in 2019 on the first year of Action Indonesia Day. And it's something that I still feel like still has a lot to grow from. I think we have a lot of zoos in Indonesia, which is amazing. We're trying to work on growing the amount of zoos in the United States and also in Europe to participate in the programmings. And that comes on the education working group side, where we post about the GSMP and we post in BIAZA, and we post in AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, like each country's association of zoos. We really try to drum up support for the animals, and having things like all of the resources that we have available, our social media package, like all these things that zoos are able to just download for free and use, has been really helpful. But really there's a lot of room still to grow. And it grows every year, I think, which is really amazing to see. And it's exciting to see where it's going to go from here, and how many other zoos and even individuals can become a part of raising awareness for the GSMP.
Amazing. Did anyone have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think I want to say something about how the Indonesian zoo actually get involved with this. For my first year, and Maya actually and Jonathan working with this program, yeah, like in PKBSI, we have like 57 members of zoo. So this is new for us. So we have to really let them know that this is a big moment that we have to involve, because this is our animal, which the other zoos outside Indonesia, they care about this. So three of us really make a lot of what they call, not really campaign, but talk to our colleague to get involved with this. But luckily the first year, I think, I cannot remember the number, Jonathan know better, but a lot of them participated in this program. Then through the years, still some of them the spirit is still there, you know. Then I hope, even though this is in a pandemic area, my colleague in the zoo will still join this program, even though it's virtually. Then I know our head of association, Bapak Mr. Rahmat Shah, he's really support about this program. So it is really good, I think.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. Really exciting. And it's great to see when people are getting excited about, you know, becoming involved in something and then keep it going.
Yeah.
We have a question from Aditya in the chat, which I think is probably addressed to Julia, Holly, and Maya. So the question is, do you find any challenges in explaining zoo visitors about the species difference with domestic cattle? So how do you kind of like tread that line, and how do you explain these differences to people? And I don't know if one of you wants to start. I can't see all of you at once, but
I'll start, I don't mind. So at Chester, our Banteng, which I presume is kind of what this is referring to, they are in a very kind of immersive area called Islands, and it feels very kind of like you are traveling as part of that journey and seeing these animals on the way. So people recognize automatically that they, or feel like they're in an area that's not the UK, and it's not kind of native cattle that we have here in the UK. And obviously they do look quite different to the kind of cows and things that we have here in the UK anyway. So we don't, I feel, struggle too much with people kind of knowing the difference. I suppose there is a slight barrier there if people think that they are just a cow, but that's where kind of the education kind of side comes into it. And I suppose that's the same with all three of the species in question. And that's kind of where, as educators, you can tell them about the threats and how we can save them and things, and the threats that they're facing in the wild, to kind of make people understand and care more about the species personally. I think that's the same kind of across all animals, but particularly important with these three species.
Awesome, thank you, Holly. And Julia, Maya, do you want to add anything to this answer?
I think that that's definitely one of the more difficult things to talk about with people, in terms of like, people have to understand that there is a difference in the first place. And so we do very similar things where we talk about, you know, there's only, you know, in some areas, a couple of thousand of Banteng left, and being able to keep them in those areas and propagating in those areas is really important. But then also having, you know, a population within zoos that were able to have that that backup population, like James was saying, is important to maintaining that species on Earth. And it's important also to explain to people, you know, why these animals are so important, and they're important in seed dispersal, and they're important to the ecosystems in which they live. You know, we live on the opposite side of the world, and so a lot of people have that question of like, well, how does this affect me? And so we just implemented or are implementing new key messages for the whole zoo, and our Asia key message is your actions have global impacts, and making those connections between how people in the United States, the actions that they take in their everyday lives, are actually affecting animals on the other side of the world, and trying to make that connection between how it actually does the actions that you take do have these effects in other areas, and then making those connections between the animals.
Awesome. Maya, do you want to add anything?
Let me please, I will ask with bahasa bahasa Indonesia, Yonatan. Maybe Yonatan can translate. Aditya from Indonesia ya. Ya, jadi Taman Marga Satwa Ragunan ketika menjelaskan ke pengunjung tentang beda hewan GSMP dengan spesies hewan ternak gitu ya, domestic cattle, biasanya kami menggugah dulu gitu ya, make awareness dulu ke pengunjungnya, apa itu Babirusa gitu ya. Babirusa itu sangat langka gitu, cuman ada di Sulawesi, only in Sulawesi gitu. Terus gimana tentang Anoa? Anoa itu kerbau kerdil unik gitu ya, sangat unik, kerbau yang kerdil gitu. Dan juga Banteng. Banteng itu bukan sapi gitu ya, dia hanya ada di Taman Nasional, di sedikit Taman Nasional gitu ya, paling banyak ada di Baluran gitu. Itu yang kami jelaskan. Jadi menggugah dulu awareness, menggugah pengunjung apa itu hewan-hewan itu seperti apa, baru setelah itu kita jelaskan kenapa mereka perlu dilindungi. Jonathan.
Okay, check. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Yeah. So Bu Maya explained on in Ragunan Zoo. Actually, there are some visitor that may be confused about the difference of the species with the domestic cattle, but I think the important thing that they raise is they introduce or give a point out about the uniqueness of its species first. So, for example, the Anoa as the maybe with the small size but small wild cattle, and the Banteng and the Babirusa with their unique task. So they will start with the uniqueness of its species first, that maybe it can make the visitor curious or maybe interest to hear more stories about the species, and then after that they will explain and tell another story like the protection, the conservation stories, and why we should protect them and help them to improve the population. So I think that's the point.
Thank you so much, and thank you for translating.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. When this is talking about the question from Aditya in Indonesia, I mean, like, yeah, in the zoo, why I think that question arises, because in Indonesia, we have another cattle that look alike Banteng. So that is in Indonesia, yeah. So see, that's why the question arises. So we have to let visitor know that this is not, we call sapi Bali or sapi Madura like that, but this is Banteng. It's totally different. So that's why in this program, James also asking the program for genetic, James, genetic analysis for Banteng. So it will really find out, I mean, like, to distinguish between the livestock, I mean, the cattle, no, livestock, yeah, and also the wild animal. So, I mean, like, maybe in Chester or in Miami, you only see Banteng. But in Indonesia, we have those two different names, but almost the same morphological. Sapi Bali and sapi Madura. So itu ya Mas Aditya, kita kasih tahu itu, dan DNA analysis adalah salah satu cara untuk meyakinkan bahwa in the zoo, what we have is Banteng with DNA analysis. Is that correct, James?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yeah. Just to add a really quick comment, it's not just it's a very good question, because it's not just a challenge for the zoos, but it's a challenge for the conservation of these species in situ as well. But I think it's, so we're all needing to educate and inform people, whether we're working in situ or in zoos, and zoos are doing a great job to get the message out, to explain the difference. And if we don't protect these species and we only have domestic sapi Bali or pigs or cattle, then then where these domestic animals came from will be gone. So all of the ecosystem help functions that they have that Julia mentioned to look after these beautiful rainforests will be gone, and that genetic resource is also gone. So yeah, it's a really important job that educators do to share the difference, explain the difference, and explain why they're important.
I can see, Holly, that you've got your hand raised. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, all I wanted to say was that a way kind of around that, as like we were saying, you know, it doesn't seem to be too much of an issue in the US and here in the UK zoos. But yeah, I can imagine in Indonesia, you know, you have so many of these different species. A way of illustrating that to visitors could be to create almost like a family tree to see kind of how connected the cattle are that are native and then the Banteng, to kind of show that although they could be from the same branch, they are completely different animals, may help people to kind of understand where the connection is or how far apart they are not connected.
Well, that definitely sparked a lot of discussion. I think we have time for like a very quick last question. And I wanted to ask a question to James, actually, before moving on to the final part of this webinar. James, what drove your interest in this species to start with? Because obviously, you know, you've been working with this species for a while now. You're part of the IUCN group. What drove you to them initially?
That's a great question. And I think it's actually the question why the educators, what we started off talking about, what Charlotte explains at the start, that I was aware of other beautiful Indonesian species, the Asian elephant, the Sumatran tiger, but I knew that there was quite a lot of interest in those species in situ. So when I started doing field work in Indonesia and talking to Indonesian colleagues about which species were kind of most threatened, but not receiving much conservation effort or interest, were kind of forgotten, then yeah, the Anoa came up as a species that not so many people knew about. People didn't know that the Anoa only occurred in Sulawesi, Indonesia. So I thought, hey, we need to change that. And now people are starting to know about Anoas all over the world even more. So brilliant.
Awesome. So you went for the underdog. I like this.
Yes, yeah, that's the one.
Awesome. Well, we are now going to have to move to the final part of this webinar. But thank you again so much for answering all the questions. Thank you to people who put their questions in the chat. So before wrapping up, I think I wanted to go back to you, Charlotte, and ask you if you could tell us what are the future plans or aspirations for the GSMP Education Working Group, and what's in the pipeline? What should we be excited about?
Thank you. Well, our immediate priority is Action Indonesia Day this year on the 14th of August, and we'd love to see lots of people joining in. But longer term, we really want to develop our education campaign work. And I think that discussion we've just had really highlighted some of the challenges around making our campaign message more territory specific or species specific, because the species are endemic to different parts of Indonesia. They face slightly different threats. The audiences we work with have different capacities to be able to do something. So finding those connections, as Julia mentioned, between the audiences in the US and in different parts of Europe and in different parts of Indonesia with the species will require us to be much more nuanced in the way that we present our campaigns. So we want to really develop that whilst not losing the impact of having a global campaign and that we're all working on this together. We also want to work more with in situ partners. Other parts of the GSMP, other working groups are working quite closely in situ. And that is something that the education group haven't really developed as much of yet. So that's an area for development for us. We also really want to understand and potentially do more research to understand the nuances of people's attitudes to these species in the different territories, because that's the only way we can really inform a very well-developed campaign in the longer term. And we'll continue with evolving resources, making sure that we're fully resourcing people to take part in those campaigns and those education programs, which will also go along with developing our training programs. So that's really our kind of longer term plan. But as I say, Action Indonesia Day is our big focus. So we would love to see people on this call. If you're part of a collection or an individual, go to the website, download the social media packet. There really is everything you need there to take part, either as an organisation or an individual, in helping celebrate this day, celebrating these amazing species. Even one of the things that's in that packet is the personality test. So if nothing else, it's worth going and having a look to download to see for yourself which of the species you're most like. And thanks to Zoo Miami for that. The details, I believe, will be put on the screen at the end for how to find the website and how to get in touch with us. As a final plug, the Education Working Group, we're a reasonable sized group, but we are looking for more members to join us, particularly people who are interested in helping us with the website and with the social media. So if you are interested, then drop me an email. I'll put my email in the chat as well, but there's also the GSMP email that will come up at the end. So do drop us a line if you're interested in being part of our Education Working Group, because it's a very open door and it's a really fantastic group of experts from around the world to work with. I think one of the great things about being part of something like this that is really global is the amount of learning that we all do. Even when we're delivering training, we're still learning about how the same challenges or similar challenges are approached in different parts of the world. So I could really recommend that as a benefit that you gain from being part of this kind of campaign, as well as helping save some little known but very, very special species.
Amazing, thank you so much. And yes, I wanted to remind everyone to check the resources. So it's great that it'll be on the final slides. Again, massive thanks to all the speakers, to all of you who came in today. While we're on the topic of resources, I'm just going to do a little conservation optimism plug as well while I'm here. Obviously, a lot of education is connected to communicating with audiences, and we have a positive communication toolkit available on our website, which is in Indonesia Bahasa. So if anyone is interested, you can, if you Google positive communication toolkit, it should come up and you can download it as well for free. Please keep a look out for future GSMP webinars. There'll be others from other groups, other working groups, and every info about that will be shared on the Action Indonesia Facebook page and the website. So obviously, if you're not yet following Action Indonesia on social media, just make sure to do that as well. And yeah, I think that's it for this webinar, except if anyone has any, burning last words. But otherwise, it was great to see all of you. Great to hear from so many experts. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, depending on where you are in the world.